Good evening. I'm Bradley Graham. I'm the co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine. And on behalf of the entire P&P staff and all the staff here at Sixth I, I'd like to welcome you. You know, we at P&P are always delighted to partner with Sixth I and co-sponsor author talks in this truly marvelous building. Esther Forer, who is the executive director of Sixth I, and her organization have done a terrific job establishing this place as a vibrant cultural center, now celebrating its 10th anniversary. And we're looking forward to continuing our great partnership with them. As a bookstore owner, I'm often asked by writers for advice on how to promote a book after it's been published. I don't think I've ever suggested going out and winning a Pulitzer Prize and making sure it's awarded just a few weeks before the release of the book. But that's what Glenn Greenwald did. How's that working out for you, Glenn? Oh, pretty well. Glenn, of course, led the reporting team at The Guardian, which, along with the Washington Post, just won the Public Service Pulitzer for reporting on Edward Snowden's NSA files. The Pulitzer Committee commended Glenn and his colleagues specifically for sparking a debate about the relationship between the government and the public over issues of security and privacy. Glenn has been winning awards and recognition for just this sort of revelatory, provocative coverage ever since he gave up practicing law about 9 years ago to write columns and books. He started his first blog in 2005 because, as he says in the introduction of his new book, he had become alarmed by the Bush administration's post-9/11 theories of executive power and wanted to make a broader impact than his career as a constitutional and civil rights lawyer had allowed. By 2007, he had become a contributing writer at Salon, and in 2012, he signed up with The Guardian, having established himself as a dogged pursuer of stories involving government overreach. It was Glenn's aggressive coverage of such controversies as warrantless wiretapping by the NSA that led Snowden to seek him out and enlist him in the release of the classified files documenting the NSA's vast information collection apparatus. Glenn tells this story in fascinating, revealing, and impassioned detail in his fifth and latest book, No Place to Hide. A few months ago, Glenn left The Guardian to launch and edit a new online publication called The Intercept, which is part of First Look Media, the pioneering journalistic venture being backed by Pierre Omidyar. But he's far from finished with the Snowden archive. He's been saying there's more to come, including even bigger revelations. As he told one interviewer, quote, "I like to think of it as a fireworks show. You want to save your best for last." Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Glenn Greenwald.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for that extremely warm and generous welcome. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. And thanks as well to Sixth I and Politics and Prose for inviting me to this spectacular venue. I witnessed when I was an adolescent a large number of my friends being bar mitzvahed, and I never was. And I discovered when I came in here that I had some lingering jealousy and resentment. So I feel like I got to compensate a little bit for that tonight. So I have that surprise happiness about being here. You know, book tours, which I'm now in the middle of, are singularly exhausting. But they're also really exhilarating. And the reason they're exhilarating is because when you work on an issue or a story, like I've been working on the NSA archive every single day for almost a year, you end up focusing on these documents and on these stories on a very kind of case-by-case basis. And you don't really have the opportunity to step back and think about some of the broader implications and the more profound consequences of the work that you've been doing. And writing a book, and especially going around and talking about your book with people who have read it and who have been interested in your work for a long time, and having that dialogue is a really provocative and interesting way to be able to think about those issues. And as much as I like book tours, I particularly like events like this, as opposed to what I normally do on the book tour, which is sit in studios answering the same set of very predictable and at this point vapid questions over and over by people who work as journalists. And I really look forward to the question and answer session, which I know will be great, as long as you don't ask me two questions. One is, so we understand that Mr. Snowden arranged to be carrying a Rubik's Cube when he met you. Tell me about that. And then the other question being, last week, General Keith Alexander, the longtime NSA chief, said that your journalism will result in the death of innocent people. Do you stay up at night worrying about the blood that's on your hands? So I'm certain that those two questions won't be part of what we ask, and therefore it will be infinitely better than almost every television interview that I do. So I wanted to begin by talking about what I did in the first part of the book, the first two chapters, which is tell the story of how I came to meet and then work with Edward Snowden, along with my longtime friend and journalistic collaborator, Laura Poitras, in Hong Kong. And the reason that I really wanted to write a book and to tell that story is because so much has been said about all of those events, and so much of what has been said has been wildly false. And one of the really interesting things is that if you're somebody who really likes to bash the American media, and I'm definitely somebody who likes to do that, it's one of my most favorite pastimes, it doesn't really come as a surprise to learn that much of what the media churns out is misleading in all sorts of ways. But when you're actually at the center of a story like this, and you're reading in the newspaper claims about what it is that happened, when you actually know the truth because you were at those events and were a part of them, your appreciation for their capacity to mislead expands wildly. It really is shocking to have seen some of the things that have been said, given my firsthand knowledge of how false they are. I mean, I remember in particular in Hong Kong, when we revealed Edward Snowden's identity at his insistence on June 10th of last year, from June 10th until June 23rd, the instant consensus of the American national security elite here in Washington and of large numbers of the American media was that there's no question but that this is almost certainly a Chinese espionage operation, that Edward Snowden is almost certainly a spy of the government in Beijing. And then on June 24th, when he left Hong Kong and flew to Moscow on his way to Ecuador and got trapped in Moscow by the US government, which revoked his passport and bullied the Cubans to rescind their offer of safe passage, the very same people who had been accusing him of being a Chinese spy instantly transformed their smear campaign into, oh, he's obviously an agent of Vladimir Putin. I mean, that's been obvious all along, and it just seamlessly switched. And I know that if he flew tomorrow to, I don't know, Seoul, South Korea, those same people would immediately accuse him of being an agent of that government or wherever he would fly around the world. There was this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal just last week saying, we know for certain either that this whole operation is either a Chinese spy ring or a Russian spy ring or a Sino-Russian joint operation. It's definitely one of those. So it was really remarkable to see just how those kinds of things can ossify so quickly. And then there was the issue of who Edward Snowden was. This actually stunned me. I was vaguely aware of this at the time, but I was a little bit occupied back in June in Hong Kong and wasn't paying too much attention to what people like David Brooks and Bob Schaefer and David Ignatius and Jeffrey Toobin were saying. But in writing the book, I actually went back to see how the media narrative formed in the wake of our disclosures and our unveiling of our source. And it is really remarkable. I mean, I'm mystified to this day how it happened that almost overnight, within 24 hours, all of these journalists who never heard of the name Edward Snowden before, had no idea who he was or what he did or what motivated him, were able instantly to diagnose him medically, psychologically, in a remarkably coordinated way. This consensus arose that he was a fame-seeking narcissist. And literally within the 48 hours after he was unveiled, that phrase appeared in countless newspaper columns and in all sorts of television programs and persists to this day, even though at the very time that those people were smearing him, demeaning and maligning his character in that way as a means of distracting attention from the revelations, he was telling me, and we were executing his plan, which was, I'm going to unveil myself one time and come forward and say, I am the person who did this, because I feel an obligation to stand up